Welcome back to the Center in the City podcast. I am so glad you are here. I'm your host, Wade Brill, and on today's episode, I'm so excited to have Kelsey Ley with us, who is a learning and development consultant, trainer, and coach. Kelsey specializes in working with manager development, and she's worked with companies like Principal, Meta, Bender Management, Verano, the Boys and Girls Club, and many more. In today's discussion, we talk about how can managers, specifically new managers, practice staying centered as there are many more pushes and pulls and expectations when you're in this new role. And so how do you settle into this role and start to figure out who you are? What's your management style? And how do you manage your own nerves and your own mindset and flex your own skills? Kelsey is so delightful to talk to, and you're going to walk away with this episode with so many great takeaways. So let's settle in and let's get centered. Kelsey, welcome to the Center in the City podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to begin by having you share with us what is one of your favorite centering practices that you use?
What a juicy question, Wade.
As a mom, I'm sure you have many tricks up your sleeve.
Yes. I've actually really gotten into meditations when I'm laying in bed, like at night or in the morning. Obviously with little ones, you hear them at 4 o'clock and then your brain turns on and you're like, I really could use some extra rest, or at night similarly. And I've really enjoyed just having, of course, maybe not the best practice, but having a phone nearby, being able to turn on a 15-20 minute meditation, and it totally changes my energy and vibe. And I can feel the effects of it for the entire day. So that's been something newer, but I've really been leaning into that practice.
Yeah, you. Is there a specific app you love or instructor you love?
I've just been using Insight Timer and their free version for now. There's so much great content on there. And often I end up falling back asleep or drifting off halfway through, and that's great as well. So,
Fun fact, I'm also on Insight Timer, and it's such a great app. There's so many amazing teachers. So, yeah,
I'm on
great
the search
resource.
too.
Yeah, I can lull you to sleep. I love it. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is because, I have a lot of clients and I think a lot of listeners as well who are either in corporate, who are just transitioning into leadership positions, whether becoming a manager for the first time or they're taking on more responsibility as a director. And then there's also clients who are leaving corporate who never had an opportunity to be a people manager, who are now stepping into their own entrepreneurial roles and are having to learn how to manage for the first time. And I thought this would be such a juicy conversation to explore how, as a new manager, do you get to practice staying quote unquote centered and all the fun things. So I'd love to hear from you. Like, what do you see when you work with managers? What are some of the initial pain points that they're experiencing as they're transitioning into this new role, especially if they've never been a people manager before?
Hmm. This is such a great topic because I think whether you've managed a team for years or you're brand new to management, when you're managing new people, it's a whole new experience and maybe a new chapter in your life. With managing someone when you're 25 or managing someone when you're 40 and have 3 children, and like it's different. And so you need different things, and your people are asking different things. The one thing that we see as pain points is just that managers tend to, especially with new people, fall on either side of a pretty black and white spectrum, which is so not black and white, but let's just for purposes of the conversation, one might be a people pleasing mindset, and the other one is like, there's no entry. I have a cement box around me, and you do this, you do that, you do that, and like just very transactional. So it's either like overly friendly, overly forgiving, lack of boundaries, or these really harsh boundaries that don't let people in. And so finding that out, oftentimes that's what's modeled for us, are these two extremes. And so it's no wonder we tend to fall into them, especially in uncomfortable new situations. And so I think we'll get into it, but strategies for finding your middle ground and your flow and your authentic voice that can navigate some of the pros and cons of both of those sides.
I love that you just named that because I think it's so tangible for listeners to think about, which one do I tend to lead towards? Am I a leader who is geared towards that people pleasing tendencies, trying to overcompensate my schedule, bend over backwards to help my people, run myself into the ground because my plate is so full? Or am I this person who is more authoritarian and kind of is just like dictatorship, a little bit of like giving orders, it sounds like, and boxing them off from building relationships and building that sense of team and psychological safety that I'm hearing. So just being able to name that, I feel like, is so helpful. If we dive into these a little bit deeper for people who might be more geared towards people pleasing manager, what are some of the actions that they're doing that people can start to notice? Oh, am I leading towards this kind of management style?
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely lean more towards the people pleasing side myself. So I'm very familiar with these actions and habits. It's this maybe like resistance to conflict as well. So if someone asked to have a meeting at 8:30, but like me this morning, like have a hard time getting your child dropped off at school before 8:30, and it's going to cause a lot of extra stress that day, but you're just doing it because maybe it's even someone above you or someone on your team that is feeling like they really need the help. So you're flexing, you're not flexing in a good way, but you're bending on boundaries that you had in place for good reason. And I'm not saying to go to the other side of, nope, I'm only available from 10 to 12 for meetings, right? And like, don't bother me otherwise. But there's this urge to bend on boundaries. I think that's a great way to put it, because then you all of a sudden find yourself in places where, you're upsetting your family, or you're not going to the gym, or your child is watching, 3 hours of TV in the afternoon instead of 45 minutes because you've just bent on your boundaries, and not let those, like, kept that in place. The other thing is accountability. Accountability is one of the most challenging topics that I work with managers on right now. And again, it's this fear of, well, I don't want to be so strict. Like, if we have to move a deadline, that's okay. Yes. And like me being overly kind and not holding any deadlines, then we start to lose traction. We start to lose momentum. We start to lose a little bit of healthy competition within our teams to meet and exceed our goals. And so if we're not following through on what those deadlines are, and then having some of those maybe tougher conversations that are like, hey, we missed a deadline and I don't want that to happen again. How can we look at the system? How can I support you? What do we need to do? I think those two things paired together are very common traits of people pleaser. So the bending on boundaries and the lack of accountability.
Oh, and you just brought up the like, how do we manage conflict? Because I think it's a huge skill that not many of us are just taught as humans in general. Like a lot of people love avoiding conflict, and especially in the workplace when you need to be able to face conflict in a healthy way to have those repairs when there's rupture so that teams can work together and still reach goals. When you work with managers on like navigating their careers and navigating this new positions, what are some ways that they can practice navigating conflict with a little bit more ease?
And I'll say, I actually think both extremes of the black and white, the people pleaser and the like cement box manager, are both doing that out of fear of conflict. Because if you have a cement box around you and you're just not going to let the human in at all, then you don't have to talk about the thing. You don't have to navigate the flexibility that might be needed or, like adapt at all. And so it's interesting that both of these, we in coaching use the term hyper and hypo, the black and white thinking, but I think both sides of the spectrum are avoiding conflict in a way, which is a really juicy topic. But to your question around starting to navigate conflict as a manager, the first thing is your mindset around conflict. And I actually we do manager circles with managers from all different organizations, and the topic of last week's circle was our relationship with authority. And so starting to get very curious around how is conflict modeled for you in different relationships throughout your life. Maybe that's a relationship with a parent, a relationship to a first boss, a relationship to a sibling, a relationship to your partner, right? So where some people grew up in households where conflict was happening regularly and they're very comfortable with conflict. Now me, opposite end of the spectrum. Like my parents told us they were getting a divorce when I was in high school, and I thought a divorce would come with screaming and arguments, but I never saw conflict in my household. And so therefore I didn't have a lot of healthy models of what conflict could look like. So I think it's just acknowledge where you're at and just be like, okay, so I'm definitely on the people pleasing side because I just didn't have that model. That's okay. Now I can start to work with this and get more comfortable with it. And I'll say the number one like mindset mantra that I have around conflict is that not all conversations have to be confrontations. And so maybe it might be a little sticky for me around, ooh, I really can't do an 8:30 meeting. I need to make it 9 because that will just work way better for me and cause a lot less stress in the morning routine. Well, the other person on the other side might not think that's a big deal at all, but that might be stressful for you. So it's like, I don't have to make this a confrontation or a conflict in my head. So it's a lot of times just starting with that mantra. It's just noticing where you're feeling that this is about to be a conflict and then seeing, was it a conflict or was it not? Like it not putting a lot of weight on this is going to be a really awkward conversation. Well, you don't know if it will be because the other person might not find it to be awkward at all.
Right. Isn't it so interesting how we can get wrapped up into the stories automatically in our mind? And I love this point that you're making, and some of the work that I do with my clients around mindfulness and self-regulation in our nervous system is even just you're asking this question of like, recognize what your relationship is to authority. And then in those moments where maybe there's a people-pleasing urge, right? Recognize where is that coming from in the body, because our nervous system is getting a flashback to something probably deeply embedded in us from childhood, most likely, or maybe somewhere else in our adult patterning, and how we can meet that place to self-regulate ourselves so that we don't live from this impulsive urge if it's not helpful, right? If it's not really in alignment with how we want to be showing up. So to your point of like, oh, can I notice what's happening in my body as I'm really wanting to make this person happy by making an 8:30 meeting, but yet when I ask myself, what do I need in this moment or what's going to work for me? And then can I meet that sense of like inner panic or inner, for me, because I'm also have some people pleasing tendencies. I think a lot of women also do, as we're conditioned in our culture, is to meet that place and to say like, oh, am I serving myself here? And a lot of the times we override our own needs, right? Because that's what we've been trained to do. So to flip it back and turn inwards, so much juiciness can happen there.
Just to that point, someone once told me, and I wish I knew, or I read it somewhere, heard it somewhere, but people pleasing and I love how you said that, overriding your needs is an addiction like alcohol and smoking. And so there's nothing wrong with us, but it is at that intersection where you have an opportunity to say, I can either go down the path of least resistance and go ahead and just give in, or I'm going to try and create this new narrow pathway because I know that old way isn't serving me anymore and I am addicted to it. So I'm going to work on making a different choice this time and exploring that more regularly.
Yeah, like we don't have to self-sabotage ourselves in those moments. And there's enough space for both people's needs to be met, right? There's enough space for our needs to be met in that moment, as well as the person we're trying to coordinate with. And just as you beautifully said, like they might love meeting at noon instead of 8:30 anyway, right? If when we suggest something else, but our mind thinks, oh my God, no, I need to serve this person and I need to make sure I'm meeting their needs and I want to be liked and I want to look good and all the other fun thoughts and beliefs that come around with the people pleasing aspect. Managers are research has shown how managers can like make or break employees' well-being in the workplace. So like having a good manager is really important and why it's so worth companies investing in training for specifically new managers to learn some new skills. What are some of the skills you feel like makes a damn good manager?
I mean, emotional intelligence. I know it's there. I mean, it's a newer, compared to other skill-based learning, but it's newer on the menu for manager training in the last couple of decades to really show that higher emotional intelligence and navigating the humans of the business. It's really the one position that is empowering and motivating the day-to-day operations of any company, and that aspect is so important. I will also say, so emotional intelligence, the other one is being able to navigate change I love to use I love frameworks and I love processes and I love systems. So I think that's where my training intersects both of these, because people that are more data driven, I can bring them in and then layer the emotional intelligence piece, and people that are more of the feelers and like emotional intelligence, bring them in and layer in the systems, because the systems are really, really important to be reflecting back the success of your team and the dynamic. But there's a process called design thinking, and I use design thinking as a manager all the time. And if you don't know what design thinking is, just Google what is design thinking. And it is the process of solving very large challenges like childhood obesity and homelessness, societal challenges that are much larger than just one team or even one system. It's like this multi-layered system that works together. And I like to use that. And the very first thing in that model, in the design thinking model, is one, believing that the solution lives within the problem. So if there's a problem happening on your team, even like people showing up late or people missing deadlines, very common problems on a lot of teams. And so or turnover, right? A little bit of a bigger problem, more complex, but getting really curious of like, the people here know the solution. We just have to provide space and allow them to get curious around the why this is happening and how we can solve it. And then the ability to sit and in that curiosity instead of jumping to problem solving. So a lot of times managers don't like to sit in the curiosity, and they think that their job is just to solve problems left and right, solve problems, put out fires. But that just then perpetuates itself to solving problems. And so if you can have the skill to see the problem at a bird's eye view, get curious about the problem, and facilitate some really interesting conversations among your team members, you're going to get much more aligned solutions instead of just trying to check problems off and keep problems away.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so some good skills I'm hearing so far, like emotional intelligence, curiosity, which is all under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. It sounds like being able to hold the space for people to brainstorm and to like empower the team to be ignited and more of a growth mindset instead of also like coming in with just like, give me the answer. Kind of shutting that down. What are some other characteristics of a really good manager? Like things that even as people are listening, think of like, oh yeah, like those are values or qualities that I want to embody one day if I'm not already flexing them.
Yeah. Starting off the bat is consistency as well. So showing up consistently, especially if you're new, being at work, whether you're remote or in person, like be there regularly and be where you say you're going to be. Be at your one-on-one meetings, right? Like be at the group meetings. Don't allow meetings to go over and show up 15 minutes late. Like show up where you say you're going to show up consistently, and that builds trust over time. So be consistent is huge, and then follow through. I think we all inherently know that that's a great skill set that we see in other people that we're like, wow, she said she was going to do something and she did it. what a novel concept. Or, we would all love to expect that. So people do expect you to do that. So following up consistently is important. That follow through. And if you don't, or if you can't, communicating that. And not letting those things slip through the cracks, because people go in with 100% trust, but those lack of follow through, lack of consistency are things that start to put cracks in a container, if you will, and take longer and more effort to repair. So.
Oh God, exclamation mark, because what you just shared is not only true of like manager dynamics, but that's true of even just ourselves. Like when we're not consistently showing up for ourselves, we break trust with ourselves. And so how important it is to consistently show up for self, whether you're a manager listening to this or not, like that is just a huge human takeaway here on how we can practice being centered in this crazy world that we're navigating. Okay, there are a few other juicy topics I want to talk about that I know can be hard for managers in general, especially new managers, but one of them being delegation. I know a lot of managers have a hard time delegating. What are some ways that they can just even gain clarity on like what can they delegate and how can they also delegate for specifically maybe that type of manager that we're calling who's a little bit more dictator in the box thinking, like how can they delegate in also a kind way?
I think especially if you're new to a team, I love, observation over action first. And so whatever people have been doing, let them keep doing that for those first few months of being new to a team. Or even if you're thinking to yourself, like, oh, I want to shift some roles and responsibilities and delegate different parts of the business to these different individuals, uh, you know, pause before you just start saying, hey, there's this new report. Can you take care of that? Well, that one report requires X communication from 4 different departments that, the timing of when things are due and where is actually a complete choreographed, synchronized system that needs to work. And so again, pausing to understand a little more before we dive into delegation. The other thing I really love to do is I like to ask my people, like, and make sure you have a really strong pulse on your team members around one, where are they in their kind of career journey and what are they looking to take on? Because the more we can align, I'm not saying 100%, again, not this black and white thinking, but the more we can align tasks and projects and a simple report that, requires managing people from all different parts of the business, the more we can align with their interests, the better. And so that increases our buy-in, and that increases the, oh, I see you. I see that you actually want more reporting or you want more management. So let's have you as a first-time manager oversee the summer interns this year. Like, these are ways that, you can start with small projects and start, kind of testing, not testing your people, but just testing if this is a type of initiative that they want to be working on and it makes sense in their roles.
I love that invitation. So it's kind of like instead of delegating, like, here, go do this, it's more of an invitation. Like, hey, what's lighting you up right now? What's part of your career plan? How can we as a team set you up for success? Like working together to then find projects that they get to invest in. And then it sounds like there's even more buy-in from them and probably more excitement and enthusiasm. And hence the work will probably even be more effective than just like, here, take this report.
Yeah. And I will say, like, things fall in buckets. So again, not 100% is going to be perfectly aligned with your career or interest driven. And when we're on a tight deadline and a client needs something, that is when to use your more authoritative voice, which is not a bad thing. Maybe assertive instead of authoritative. So assertive in saying, hey team, like, you are the expert at reports right now, and we do need this report put together. And I know it's going to take 8 hours, and we do need it by the end of the week. So what else is on your plate? I think this follow-up conversation around, I need you to take care of this. What else is on your plate? And how can I help you prioritize? Instead of just, here's another 8-hour report, here's another 8 hour, right? And so without checking in on the rest of the workflow can be a common miss for managers.
Mm-hmm. And that I feel like really helps people feel taken care of. They feel fully seen when a manager's not just like, let me add something else to your balancing act, but hey, let's restructure the priorities here so that you actually have capacity to get what you need to get done.
And I would say, with each, not every quarter, but every year at least, it's an opportunity to revamp job descriptions. So what is on your plate? What is working? What isn't working? What are some of those systems we just hobbled through this calendar year because we just needed to, and it just wasn't worth the energy to redo them? But with the new year, let's rethink some of this and also distribute as needed. Even if you're not you don't have, that doesn't mean you have to be adding a new team member or bringing in more capacity, but maybe there are some things that are no longer even serving your team and you can let some things go, or they can be automated, or maybe there's a new team member in marketing and you realize part of your team is still doing marketing initiatives. That happens all the time, right? Like that piece could move officially over to the marketing department. So I think the other thing that builds trust with your team is just them knowing that it's not just a one-way street of dumping work, but it's this cyclical, ongoing, living and breathing conversation of our roles are always evolving. The business is always evolving. I can advocate for new opportunities. And my boss is going to be asking me. So I want to be consistently thinking about what are different projects I would want to be taking on.
I think that's a really powerful way to think about your role as a manager, that you're investing in real breathing relationships. It's something like a plant. You got to keep hydrating it, keep nourishing it, keep watching it flourish. It's not just a one-way street, as you're saying. Okay, another aspect that I know can be really challenging for managers in general, but I think especially like new managers when you're flexing into this role, is how to give feedback. And I know this is a whole other like podcast topic, but what's like one insight or tip you would recommend that managers can practice as a powerful way to give feedback or even think about feedback?
So all conversations do not have to be confrontations. And so feedback is one of those places where we get those inner body jitters and just really uncomfortable at addressing anything. And so I'm right there with you. So just normalizing that it's a body pattern of like feedback equals conflict, but it doesn't have to be. And the other thing I like to practice to keep myself accountable is the 24-hour rule. So, there's so many tips. The 24-hour rule, and feedback is best given in private. So celebrations in public, feedback in private, especially as a new manager, as you're navigating and building relationships with team members and getting the practice of feedback under your belt. But have the conversation in private, do it within 24 hours, and make it conversational. Also, feedback, I will say, is a personal opinion, right? So someone may be late to a meeting. That's a fact. Like the meeting started at 8:30 and they showed up 7 minutes late, and that's not okay with you. But that's also a personal opinion. Like, I like timeliness. I value timeliness. That's a value of mine as a leader. Therefore, being 7 minutes late bothers me. And so like there's some of this co-ownership of, and you may not have known that, right? Like we just started working together. And so therefore, this is an opportunity to tell you a little bit about a value that I have as a leader. And so maybe they had a leader in the past, the person that was in your role before you, that didn't care if you were 7 minutes late. And so that's a habit that they've built that has been, socially accepted in the past. And so you, within 24 hours of the lateness, capture it right away. Don't wait for it to happen a second, third, fourth time where your resentment has totally built. Go ahead and address it within the 24 hours the first time, but also bring to that conversation, why is this bothering me? Why is this action of this individual kind of like triggering that frustration and that need to even give feedback in the first place?
So smart to call it out within the 24 hours, because otherwise that shit lingers, that can bubble up. I mean, honestly, this is like info for any relationship. Romantic relationship, familiar. It's like, don't let this shit linger, because it just comes out the other end and it comes out worse. So yes, thank you for those insights and tips. Oh my God, Kelsey, I feel like we're just skimming the surface. There's so much more juiciness to discuss. So we'll have to have you back on the podcast. Where can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah. So my most active platform is LinkedIn. So just at Kelsey Ley. And then my website is kelseylee.com. So we've got a lot of things coming down the pipeline. We do a monthly manager training roundtable where you can just come and have some of these conversations. Sometimes we do topics, sometimes we make it open Q&A. It's just a lovely group of humans that are all working on manager development, and we come together about monthly. So the next roundtable will be posted on the website or shared on LinkedIn too, so you can come and explore that if you'd like.
And I went to one a few months ago and loved it, loved the conversation. So it's so empowering. I also think it's just so helpful for people to be in community with other like-minded professionals or whatever your topic is, whether you're new managers, whether you're new moms, whether you're entrepreneurs, like to just have a group of people that can speak your language and understand what you're going through. So I think having your manager roundtables is just a beautiful offering to share. Check out Kelsey's website for more information. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Centered in the City podcast. I know Kelsey and I would love to continue the conversation with you. So head on over to LinkedIn and join us, as well as you can reach out to me directly on Instagram at OneWade. And we'd love to hear, what are your takeaways? If you're a new manager, what's one tip or insight that you've gained about yourself or your management style that you want to incorporate into your life? And if you have a friend that you know would resonate with listening to this podcast, share it, because we know sharing is caring. Thanks again for being here. And until next time, stay centered.